You might want to shake up your fall dessert rotation with this pumpkin pie spice bread pudding. To make this pumpkin spice bread pudding, I started by using Trader Joe's gluten-free pumpkin pie spice bagels. Now, you don't have to use these bagels. You can use other gluten-free and vegan bagels or your favorite gluten-free and vegan bread. Whatever bread or bagel you choose, you're going to want to cut them into 1-inch squares. And you want about 6 to 8 cups of these bread cubes. Spread the bread cubes onto a parchment-lined baking tray. You want to dry out these cubes in the oven for a bit so that they can absorb the custard mixture that we're going to add without becoming too soggy. So place the bread cubes into a 300-degree oven for 20 minutes and give them a stir halfway through to allow them all to dry out. I wanted to add actual pumpkin to the bread pudding, so I got a small sugar pumpkin. This is a pumpkin pie pumpkin, and I microwaved it for about 1 minute to make it a bit soft to cut. Then I cut it in half. I cut off the stem. Then, using a spoon, I scraped out the fibrous interior and seeds, and I saved those seeds to toast for later. I then cut each of those halves into halves. I then peeled the exterior skin off using a vegetable peeler. I then cut the pumpkin into 1-inch cubes. I had approximately 2 cups of the fresh cut pumpkin. By this time, the Trader Joe's pumpkin spice bagel cubes were nicely dried out, so I set those aside while I seasoned the pumpkin. I placed half of the pumpkin onto the baking tray where I baked the bagel pieces. And I poured 1 tablespoon of melted vegan butter onto the pumpkin. 1 tablespoon of maple syrup, a pinch of salt, and I rubbed the butter and the salt and maple syrup all over the pumpkin pieces, and then I spread the pieces out onto the parchment paper on the baking tray. I did the exact same thing with the other half of the pumpkin. I just didn't want to crowd the baking pan, and I wanted all the pumpkin pieces to evenly cook. So I added the 1 tablespoon of vegan butter and the 1 tablespoon of maple syrup and then a pinch of salt to this second half of the pumpkin, and then I melted the butter here. You'll see it not melted, and then I mixed it all together. I then placed the tray and the casserole dish of pumpkin cubes into a preheated 425-degree oven, and I baked the pumpkin for 30 minutes, and halfway through I gave each of these a stir to allow the pumpkin to evenly cook. So next I started preparing the custard for the bread pudding, and I placed 2 tablespoons of flaxseed into a small bowl and added 5 tablespoons of water and gave that a stir and set that aside to allow it to gel for about 10 minutes. To a large bowl, I then added 1 cup of full-fat coconut milk, 1/2 cup of non-dairy milk. I used a combination of cashew and coconut milk by Elmhurst. I then added 1/3 cup of maple syrup. I then added 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, and 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I also then added 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And lastly, I added the gelled flax egg mixture. And then I whisked all the ingredients together to combine. I placed the bread cubes into a casserole dish and I added half of the roasted pumpkin. Then I mixed those all together to combine them. I then placed the other half of the roasted pumpkin into a high-speed blender. I then added a few tablespoons of water to the pumpkin. Then I started blending it to make a smooth puree. I realized it was too dry, and so I had to add some additional water. I think I added a whole other half cup because you want to have a smooth puree to mix into the other custard base. I then poured the custard base over the pumpkin and bagel cubes. I then also poured over the pureed pumpkin, and then I stirred all of the bagel cubes together to make sure that they were all well coated with the custard base and the pureed pumpkin. I ended up pouring the pumpkin bread pudding into a separate casserole dish that I had coated with some melted vegan butter. This was the same casserole dish that I used to actually roast the cubed pumpkin. I then made sure that the pumpkin and the bread cubes were evenly distributed in the casserole dish, and I pressed it down with the back of a spoon. I then allowed this to rest for 15 minutes before placing it in the oven. After letting the bread pudding rest for 15 minutes, I placed it in a preheated 350-degree oven, and I baked it for 45 minutes. While the bread pudding was baking, I made some coconut whipped cream. I took 1 can of coconut cream, I got it from Trader Joe's, and I had it placed in the refrigerator so that the solids would become firm enough to whip. And so I scraped out only this solid portion and I allowed the coconut water to remain in the can. So I placed these solids into the mixing bowl of my stand mixer. I then turned the mixer on to break up some of the chunks of the solids, and I then continued whipping until it became nice and soft. I then added 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar. I then continued mixing until the coconut cream became light and fluffy. Occasionally, I stopped the mixer and I would scrape down the sides. But all in all, I would say it took about 10 minutes to make this whipped cream. When I took the bread pudding out of the oven, it was crispy and golden on top. Even though the exterior was crusty, the inside seemed soft. I was excited to dish up a plate of this. As you can see, it comes out in a nice piece, an all one piece. It doesn't fall apart, and it's held together well by the custard. I encourage you to add the whipped cream because it does take it to the next level. The texture is soft and moist, particularly from the custard, but the addition of the roasted pumpkin adds another layer of texture. As far as flavor, it has all of the traditional pumpkin pie spice flavors, with the addition of fresh roasted pumpkin. And these flavors are complemented by the creamy coconut whipped cream. And just remember, this is all gluten-free and vegan. If you've enjoyed this video, hit that like button to support the channel so that I can bring you more gluten-free and vegan recipes. Also, check out these next recipes.